England is gorgeous when it's nice. When we eventually get the sun. But who planted the first tree? Here's a phrase for you. Domain of validity. Or, put it in brackets, initial condition irrelevance. What the heck does that mean? Good question. Let's start digging in. I'm going to turn the camera around because the view's much nicer that way than it is looking this way. It's tempting to think we've seen the whole picture, but we're not. We've seen the latest chapter. Every tree has a history, every path has a history, the landscape has a history. The strange thing is that most of the history has disappeared. We know it happened, but we can't replay it. And once I started thinking about that, I found myself looking at something far less impressive than a forest. A supermarket car park. You hot? Yeah, come on. Try this as a thought experiment. Go to your local supermarket, pick any car in the car park. Try and predict what journey that car took to get there this morning. The reality is you just haven't got enough information. Now, let's give you a bit of history. You saw it enter from the main road. So now, at least you know the direction it came from. With reasonable assumption, you can remove 50% of your choices straight away. Now, with enough determination and access, you could possibly get the CCTV footage and start tracing it back. And slowly but surely, with enough determination, access and willpower, you may start to piece together what that car's journey was that morning. But unless you can get hold of the Ring doorbell, you're not going to know what house it went to. You can only zoom in on approximately where you are, where it starts, what the journey was. Now, you're beginning to see the problem with physics. So now I'm going to try and stretch this car park analogy, get as much out of it as I possibly can. So by using extrapolation, we can trace things backwards and hint at the origins. So let's apply that logic to a car travelling south on the M1. The origin of the M1 via the A74, I believe, is Scotland. So the only logical conclusion you can make for that car travelling south on the M1 is that it came from Scotland. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go on a small rant about extrapolation and the dangers of it. You take the conditions now and you assume they've been continuous for 13 billion years, and then you calculate backwards, and because we're looking at a Hubble type expansion, there must have been a singularity point at some place where it all started. And it's exactly that, singularity, that no one can explain, and that apparently normal rules don't apply. I say they don't apply, they don't work. That's what they really mean. we talked about how a car travelling south on the M6 does not automatically imply it originated from Scotland. My little rant earlier questioned how 13 billion years of uninterrupted extrapolation does not automatically get you to the Big Bang. With this next analogy, the pool match, it proves you don't need to know the history to complete the game. Something has clearly happened here, but we're not exactly sure what. Now, because this is pool, and we all know how the game goes, we know the format of the game, we can imply what the initial conditions were. The coloured balls would have been racked about a third the way from the left, and the white cue ball would have been somewhere a third way in from the right. And that's where we need to stop, because between then and now is unknowable with the information we currently have. Let's assume for a moment that this is the next move after the break. Now, I'm pretty justified in saying this because I've got the video footage. What we retrospectively cannot do is reverse engineer the path of all the balls so we get back to the initial starting configuration. All we can reliably imply is that sufficient energy was introduced into the scenario that reconfigured the structure and the layout of the table. But, and this is a big but, we do not need that history to complete the game. Okay, I know you've been waiting for this, so here goes. Played at full speed, you can be forgiven for thinking this is random. 2 seconds after the initial break, some interesting points become very apparent very quickly. That once motion has stopped, and if you had no recording of the initial break, all you can see is randomness, chaos, and I really hate those terms. Chaos is just structure that we haven't figured out yet, that's beyond our resolution. Randomness implies no mechanism. Something can be anywhere whenever it wants to be. Sound familiar with some other theories out there? But you play that tape back slowly and you'll see that every ball is exactly where it has to be, given the energy put into that cue ball at the initial strike. What's also very intriguing, at least I find intriguing, is that pattern of balls is unique. It's never been seen before, ever. Most likely never will exist again, because conditions have moved on. In theory, it's possible that you may get every single ball to actually sit in the same spot, but in practical terms, everything else around it has changed. The Earth's spun a bit more, time has moved on, the guy with the cue ball's a bit older. So, just placing the balls in the same place, does that mean you've reversed everything? What I'm really saying is the universe is recursive. Every step now, every T now, time now, is dependent on the previous T then. Without that T then, there is no T now. And T then can never be recreated. So all those thinking about time travel, sorry guys, not a thing, not possible. This is played about 6% full speed. And watch that orange ball. That takes off like a bullet. For some reason that's taken the brunt of the force, and the rest of it is dissipated through every other the ball there. But now that things are settling down, you can tell that the brown on the far side, that actually took quite a bit of force too. So whatever went in through the white ball, some of it was spent sending the white ball in the air. A huge chunk of it went through the orange ball. Another significant amount went through the brown ball. And then everything else sort of cascaded and water flowed out until we find these resting positions. But by analysing the video footage, you can categorically say this was not random. The Stockgrove sundial, unfortunately, not some ancient Celtic remnant, a modern folly, but nonetheless still a sundial. But there is one major drawback with having sundials in the UK, and that is the lack of sun. We're back, and this time the sun has decided to join us. So, according to the instructions, you count from 6 o'clock all the way around to 14 o'clock. Once you've found out what month you're in. So we're in June, and we follow my shadow through, and we're at 6, 7, 8, 9, and where's my shadow? Oh. We have a slight problem. Why is it saying 9 o'clock? Answers in the comment below, please. But if you can't wait that long, the answer's quite simple. Somebody forgot to tell the sun about daylight savings. Didn't they, Indy? Where is she? Oh, that's the poo bin. There she is. The other question to answer about the sundial: why does it change by month? Again, we can go into all sorts of explanations about drawing eternity shapes as the sun goes through the seasons. And the official version is precession. The easy way to think of it is the Earth doesn't spin perfectly on its axis, it wobbles. I thought I'd just give you a panorama over the heath of England in June. It's just a few days later, and we've gone from 30 degrees to 11.5 degrees, and it's now raining. Welcome to England in the summer. Different season every day. And here we are again. So I guess in medieval times, on days like this, the ancient Brits didn't know when to eat lunch. But more interesting question: if our proxy for measuring time isn't working, have we stopped time? Okay, bit of an aside. This might not look like much of an incline to you. And, you know, it's short and sharp. And even on the best of days, it's going to make you breathe a bit harder. But to me, this represents something quite big. 6 weeks ago, I was in the back of an ambulance with all the lights flashing on my way to Harefield Cardio Hospital, where I had a surgical medical team waiting for me on arrival. And within half an hour of arriving, I had a stent installed. So the very fact I'm actually even here climbing this hill is quite something. The fact I'm doing it so easily is a testament to what those guys at Harefield Hospital actually did for me. Thank you, Harefield, and every single person that was part of that event. So, in order to give you guys some decent content, I've been staring at my camera now for about 10 minutes, recording various bits, dropping them, rewording them, trying again. And I've stopped doing that. I've looked up, and as beautiful as this part of the forest is, it's brand new to me. I've never been here before. So how important is history to the present? Well, let's try a little bit of an experiment. If you go back 8 generations in your family, so just your side of the tree, at the 8th generation level only, you're looking at 256 people. Check the maths, I think I'm right. If you include every single person in that chain, you're looking at 510 people. Now, how many of us can name a tenth of those people? Virtually no one. But if you remove a single person from that chain, you don't exist. The point I'm making here is that history has to be there. But we don't need to know what it is. Okay, for a change, we're managing a descent. Earlier in this video, I introduced a term, the domain of validity, and stated, what the heck does that mean? Well, going back to our ancestry scenario, we don't need to know what our great-great-great-grandfather had for breakfast on a Thursday. We just need to know he existed. That's the domain of validity there. I can now stretch that even further and expand that domain of validity into initial condition irrelevance. So we've gone back 8 generations. Why not 16? Why not 160? Why not 16,000? Because beyond a certain point, adding more and more history stops changing the answer. For me to exist, there must be an unbroken chain connecting the past to the present. Every one of those people mattered. Remove a single necessary link and I would not be standing here today. But that doesn't mean I need to know who they all were. It doesn't mean I need to know what they did, where they lived, or what they had for breakfast on a Thursday morning. The chain remains essential. The details become increasingly irrelevant. This is what I mean by initial condition irrelevance. History has to be there. History matters. But complete knowledge of history is not required for the present to exist. At some point, adding more information stops improving our understanding of the question being asked. The challenge is to identify where that point lies. Pro tip when you're filming a video of your feet. Watch out for the low-hanging branches, because they hurt. So we spent a lot of time talking about history, how we got here, why history matters, why an unbroken chain of events has to exist, and why, despite that, much of that history is unknowable. But that leaves us with an interesting problem. If we do not need complete knowledge of history, what do we need? What information is actually important? Because whether we're talking about a family tree, a pool table, a motorway network, or even our own lives, we still somehow manage to navigate the present despite not knowing every detail of the past. So perhaps the history isn't the whole story. Perhaps we need to look at something else. Not where something came from, but where it is now. I used images of the sky during that voiceover, and I did it for a reason. Let me replay those images. The structure we witness today is the result of a specific history that now eludes us. And perhaps nowhere is that easier to see than in the clouds above our heads. Every cloud has a history of temperature, pressure, moisture, movement. But we don't see that history directly. What we see is its expression. What we see is structure. Some may call it chaos, but only if divine chaos is structure beyond our resolution. And what we see is a continuous evolution of that structure, where every current state is completely dependent on every previous state, even if we can't recreate it. It is the same scenario used when talking about past generations. Clouds just happen to be on a timescale that makes it obvious. I briefly introduced the idea that my definition of chaos is not an unstructured mess. I describe it as structure beyond our resolution, and that chaos does not necessarily mean randomness. It may simply mean that we can no longer resolve the structure of the object that we are observing. And if we go back to the generations analogy, we already know that the current structure can depend on information that is no longer accessible to us. We saw it in the pool break. And even though we do not know the cloud's history, the cloud still evolves in a structured manner. But is missing history the only reason we struggle to recreate a cloud? The answer is no. There is another problem. The cloud is not a single thing. It is many things simultaneously. At one level, it is billions upon billions of tiny water droplets, each interacting with its neighbours. At another, it is a structure stretching thousands of feet across the sky. And yet we call both of these things the cloud. Which brings us to the third leg of this triad, scale. So why is scale such a big issue in physics? Well, compare this with this. Same tree. One branch of physics is trying to build up from the small bit and fill the blanks, while the other branch of physics, literally, is looking at a huge picture and trying to fill in the small bits. And clearly, the two aren't meeting. My word, that's embarrassing. Getting caught by passers-by talking to your phone about a leaf. Oh well. I don't know what non-Brits think of Britain, UK, England, but this is the bit I like. Anyway, good walk, good chat this morning. Now going for my coffee. In terms of scale, at the one end of the spectrum, you have an individual leaf. At the other end of the spectrum, you have a forest. And the specialist in the leaves are trying to reconstruct the forest. And the specialist in the forests are trying to reconstruct the leaves. Now we can argue over the philosophy around this, but the leaf specialists don't have enough information. The forest specialists have too much information, and that is me linking my car parks and pool tables with clouds through the medium of a forest. Hope you enjoyed that. From the vantage point of my shed roof, the structure of this cloud is obvious and awe-inspiring. We can see its shape, we can see its boundaries, and clearly we can see its scale. However, change your perspective and you change everything. Where did the structure go? Nothing about the cloud has changed, only where we are. We know the structure still exists, we've just seen it. But from within, it becomes invisible. Perhaps this isn't unique to clouds. Perhaps whenever we become embedded within a sufficiently large structure, our ability to observe that structure changes. Some scale doesn't only change what we measure. Sometimes it changes what we can see at all. So where does that leave us? Today we've explored history, we've explored structure, and we've explored scale. Because those ideas are not independent. History creates structure. Structure only has meaning at a particular scale. And changing the scale changes what we're able to observe. Along the way we looked at trees, a supermarket car park, a pool table, clouds, and even our own family histories. None of those examples were intended to prove a theory. They were intended to ask a simpler question. What information is actually fundamental? Throughout history, we've become remarkably good at describing nature. But description is not always the same as understanding. Simplicity begins from a different place. It asks whether complexity is the starting point, or whether complexity is something that emerges from simpler principles repeated across every scale of the universe. I don't expect you to agree with every conclusion. I only hope you'll leave with a few new questions, because sometimes the biggest discoveries don't come from asking more complicated questions, they come from asking simpler ones. Thank you for walking with me. If you made it this far, thank you. This is the first time uploading a public video anywhere, and I hope you enjoyed the walk. If you found something in it worth thinking about, then I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. The series is going to build slowly, one idea at a time, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. If you've got any comments, put them in the comments below. And thanks for watching. And I'll see you in episode 2.